Hey everyone, and welcome back to my tutorial series on how to build a desktop application style object-oriented Discord bot in Python. So what are we going to look at this time? Well, what I want to show you is the at a glance section. Okay, so this section is 6 data points, but it's got more logic than the other sections, so it's got its own class, even though it's only one field in our profile. Okay? So let's go ahead and jump right in and see how we're going to deal with this. In our profiles directory, let's make a new file, and we're going to call it at a glance. Okay, and before we do anything, let's go into our init and say here from.at-a-glance import star. Okay, so we don't forget. Cool. Let's do our typical imports. From future, import annotations. From Discord, import interaction. From typing, we're going to import type checking. And then if we're type checking, we're going to need a reference to the parent profile, right? So from .profile, import profile. Okay, let's drop in a horizontal rule. Cool, so let's define our class. So our class is, let's say, profile at a glance. Okay, and this is going to be a profile section, which we need to import. So here under typing, let's say from .section, import profile section, and let's use that here. And let's define our slots. Okay, so what are the data points that are going to be in this? Well, if we jump back over here into our PowerPoint, here's our at-a-glance section right here. And so we've got 6 data points here, but this is going to end up being more because our gender also has pronouns. So this is going to be 2 data points. Race and clan are going to be held separately, so this is also 2 data points. So this is actually 8 data points for our at-a-glance section. And because of the fact that we're formatting this information in such a specific way, we need all of those behaviors and all of those data points to be held separately. Okay, so 8 data points is what we're planning for. Back here in the code, let's go ahead and define the slots. So each one has an underscore, again, and we're going to say gender is 1, pronouns, race, clan, orientation, height, age, and mayor. And the reason that we're calling this mayor is because the plugin for Final Fantasy XIV, the community in which I developed the bot, the plugin that allows you to see your friends' hacked outfits is called Mayor, and that's the most common type of friend pairing code that you would see on these profiles. And so I don't want to rename it and confuse myself. So we're just going to use what I originally called it. You can call it friend code, you can call it whatever you like, but I'm going to call it Mayor. All right, so let's define our init. Okay, so def init, and into this we're going to take the parent, as we usually do, which is a profile, as well as our args and our keyword args. Okay, first thing we want to do is call the superclass and pass in the parent and the args and keyword args for good practice. And now let's define all of our attributes of the class. Okay, so we've got 8 things, and let's go through systematically and see what each one is going to be typed as. So self.gender. Well, this is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, there's only a couple of genders. Well, the world is changing. So we can't plan for all the potential gender identities that someone may want to put on here for themselves or their character, especially for their character, because the sky's the limit in that case. So I want to plan for some of the standard gender identities, but I also want to give the user the opportunity to enter a custom one. And to accomplish this, our typing is going to be optional, and all of these parameters are going to be optional because when the profile is new, they won't have been set. And we also want to give the user the option to to not include one of these. So if they don't want to include their height, or they don't want to include their age, or they don't have a friend code, this section is going to compensate for that, and it's going to reduce the amount of space. It's not going to include the ones that they don't set in the final profile, and so on. So all of these are going to be optional. And in particular, this one will be an optional gender. And the gender is going to be an enum that we create right now. So let's jump into our enums, and I'll grab this and make a new enum called gender. And this is going to be a frog enum. And here I want to say male equals 1, female equals 2, non-binary equals 3, and other, and custom, let's say custom, equals 4. Okay? And then since this is a frog enum, let's define our proper name property. So def proper name. And the only value here now that requires any special behavior is non-binary. Because we want to put a hyphen in there, just for good formatting. So if self.value equals 3, return non-binary with a hyphen in the middle. Otherwise, we can just return self.name. Okay, so that's all we need to do here for now, but we're going to be making a few more enums, so let's leave this file open. Okay, and then let's also make sure that we export our gender enum in dunder all in the enum file, like that. And then here in at a glance, let's make sure that we go up here and we'll import from utilities, import star. And while we're here, let's say from UI import star as well, because eventually we're going to need that import statement. Okay, so next up is self.pronouns. And this is going to be an optional list of pronoun. And let's import our list from typing. And what pronoun is going to be is another enum, but this is going to encompass, I believe, the 15 most common pronouns, and then the behavior for this is going to give our user a select menu from which they can choose as many pronouns as they want, because we don't want to limit them, but there's also so few edge cases in which we would want to add a custom value to this that it's not worth adding support for additional custom values in addition to what we define in this enum. So let's jump over to our enums, and we'll say class pronoun is going to be a frog enum, and then this one's going to be a lot of items, okay? So here we go. We're going to say he equals 1, him equals 2, his equals 3, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs, z, here, per is 12, pers is 13, it is 14, and its is 15. Okay, so after doing some research online, these are the most common and even edge case pronouns that people use. So we're not going to worry about custom support here. Okay, and since this is a frog enum, let's go ahead and define our property. Okay, and which ones of these do we need to return values for? Well, honestly, they all look good as is, so we can just return self.name, and it's already taken care of. Cool. And of course, let's make sure that we export it in dunder all. So pronoun. Awesome. Okay, next up, we're going to say self.race, and this will be an optional race. Okay, so let's make our race enum. Yeah, you guessed it right. And we'll add it to dunder all to start. And then down here, let's say class race is a frog enum. And then what do we want to do here? Well, the way that I'd like to approach races is that the logic behind this is going to be the same regardless of what we put in the enum. Okay? So we could put complete gibberish for our enum values, and that would work. But in this case, what I want to put is I want to put the races from Final Fantasy XIV. Okay, this is going to be the most familiar for me when writing the bot. And honestly, if you want to substitute these out for something like races from the World of Warcraft fandom or from the D&D fandom or honestly from anything, you can do that, and ultimately it's going to remain, the logic is going to remain the same. The only thing you would need to do is change the values within this enum and the proper name value and the proper name return once we define that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense on how to personalize this a little bit. But for now, we're just going to use Final Fantasy XIV races because those also give us a little bit of an insight into some special behavior that we want to define. Okay, so what are the Final Fantasy XIV races? So what do we have? We have Aura, we have Elezen, and before we do the other ones, I found that there's a category of folks, particularly in Final Fantasy XIV, that are just not comfortable with what their race is in the game, or they've just gotten addicted to changing that race. There could be a number of reasons, but there are some folks that change their race on a regular basis. And I didn't want to have to make it so that they would need to update their profile every time. I mean, for some folks, this is literally a daily thing. So the term that I've come up with to explain that and for people to put on their profile is Fantasia Addict. Because a Fantasia is the item within the game that people use to change their appearance and their race. So I felt like that was an elegant way of kind of describing people that change on a frequent basis. Okay, so next is Hrothgar, Hyur, Lalafell, Lafell, come on now, Miqo'te, not with no U, excuse me, Rogadin, Viera, and then I also want to put custom at the bottom, and I'm going to assign this a value of 999 so that our race enum is highly expandable. Okay, so no matter if we set custom to 10, and then later on we said, okay, I want to add support for additional races, we would have a hard time with that because custom would be 10, and so we couldn't add an additional race underneath Viera. We would have to skip 10 and then move on, and it could be potentially messy internally. So we just want to add our custom value way outside the range that we normally would use, so it's never mistaken for something else. Cool. Let's define our proper name property. So let's go through this. So if self.value equals 1, I want to return Aura with a space in the middle, okay? Because that's the proper grammar for spelling Aura. It's not actually one word. Okay, and what else? Elif self.value equals 3. So this is Fantasia Addict. We want to return Fantasia Addict with a space in the middle. And I believe the only other one is if self.value equals 7. We want to return Miqo'te. Miqo'te with an apostrophe in it like that. Otherwise, we can just return self.name. Okay? Cool. So that's our proper name. Let's jump back to at a glance and define our next data point. So in addition to the race, we have a clan. And this is going to be an optional clan. And we'll make a clan enum right now. So up at the top, let's export this in Dunder All before we forget. And then down here, back at the bottom, let's define our class clan, which is a frog enum. Okay, and for clan, we're going to do the same thing, but I want to list all the potential clans that we have for our races. And these are going to be, again, Final Fantasy XIV clans, but I encourage you to customize this to the fandom or just the situation that you have. Okay, so for our clans, let's list these out really fast. We've got Dunesfolk, Duskwhite, Hellion, Hellsguard, Highlander, Keeper of the Moon, Midlander, Plainsfolk, Rayan, Rava, Seawolf, Seeker of the Sun, The Lost is 13, Vina is 14, Wildwood, Xela, and that's it. And then let's make our custom value as well. And I want this to be equal to 998. And then I'm also going to put an NA value. Okay? And you'll see why we have an NA value in a minute. But the easiest way to explain is that we're going to prompt for a clan immediately after the user enters their race. Okay, so we're not going to have a separate button for clan. So in the event that they don't want to set a clan, we're going to give them this NA option so that they can null out that value. Okay, so let's see. At property, def proper name. And then there's only a couple that we have special behavior for. And so if self.value equals 6, let's return Keeper of the Moon like that. And elif self.value equals, what do we have next? 11. We want to return Seawolf with a space in the middle. Okay. elif self.value equals 12. We want to return Seeker of the Sun. elif self.value equals 13. We're going to return The Lost with a space. And we could define an additional proper name for NA and put a slash in it, but ultimately we're not actually going to see NA in the profile. That is just going to be a placeholder for a blank part of the at a glance. Okay, so let's go back over into at a glance and we'll add our next data point. Okay, so self.orientation equals an optional orientation. Okay, so let's jump into our enums. Lots of enums for this, but this is the easiest way I've found to organize this different data. Okay, so orientation in under all, and then back down at the bottom, let's say class orientation is a frog enum, of course. And in here, I just want to put the common ones. So we're going to say aromantic, asexual, bisexual, demi-romantic, demisexual, gay, lesbian, pansexual equals 8, straight equals 9, and then custom is going to equal 999, just like we've been having it. Okay, and our proper name behavior is going to be super easy because we can just return self.name. Okay, cool. So that's all of the enums that we're going to make right now, actually. Let's jump down here. Oops, doesn't equal. It is a colon there. Okay. And then for self.height, we're going to store this as an optional integer. Okay? So we don't need to make an enum for that. We're going to store it as the raw value in centimeters. Firstly, because it's kind of a screw you to the standard system that we still use in America. But in addition, it's also going to be the most precise whole number way of storing this value. Okay, and then we have self.age, which is also going to be an optional integer. And then we have self.mare, which is going to be an optional string. Okay, so the typing for this is pretty easy. Let's go ahead and say keyword args.pop for each of these, and then the default value is going to be none. So I'm actually just going to copy this, and we can fill in the value on each line. So for this, it's going to be pronouns. For this, it will be race, clan, orientation, height, age, lowercase, and mare. Okay, cool. Now, if you've been paying attention, you may be wondering, we're allowing the user to set custom values for these potentially, right? These that have an enum, we're going to allow string values. And that's absolutely correct. So let's also add in a union to each of these, and I'm going to copy union and an open bracket. And then for each of the data points with an enum, we can also add a string into this union. Okay? So the pronouns is only going to be a list of pronouns, but our race, we can go ahead and add a string to the union there, as well as with our clan and our orientation. Just like that. Okay, but we want to allow our user to put in string values for the height and age too, right? We don't want to restrict them to just a numerical value. Okay, users can put in all kinds of crazy stuff. So we also want to parse this as a string. Store these as a string, because we can store the data as a text value in the database and then check on load whether it's actually an integer or not. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And that's how we're going to store the custom values in these data points. So let's make ourselves properties for each of these that are going to expose the underlying data. Okay, so we're going to feel free to type all these out. I guarantee you probably know how most of these are going to be. I'm going to work through them here in the video, but you should be able to fast forward if you're pretty familiar with how the modules are set up at this point. So def gender, it's going to return an optional string. And then we need to plan for either a gender enum or a string. Okay, so let's say if self.gender is none, let's start by returning ns. Okay, but what if we have a gender? What if elif is instance self.gender is a gender enum? Well, we want to return self.gender.properName, right? That's why we're using that property. Otherwise, if it's a string, because those are the only three things that we can have here, let's just return self.gender. Okay? And let's make a setter. Gender.setter value, and this could be an optional union of gender or string, okay, with no return. And this one we can just set directly self.gender equals value, and make sure we call self.update as well. Next up is our pronouns. And this is going to return us, as before, an optional string. Okay, so if self.pronouns, if not self.pronouns, return ns, because one way or another, we're going to have a list here, right? Actually, we didn't define that behavior. I apologize. So in the init function, let's jump back up and break our train of thought for a second. In self.pronouns, let's say or empty list, like that, okay? And we can get rid of the optional typing here because we'll never have none. It's either going to be what we retrieve from the keyword arguments, or an empty list. Okay, so let's jump back down to our pronouns property. And I want to format this in the way we're going to have it on the profile, because the most common usage of our pronouns getter is going to be to get the formatted version of this. Okay, so I want to return a \join, and we're going to do list comprehension within the join call, okay? So I'm going to say p.properName for p in self.pronouns. Return. Okay, so we're looping through self.pronouns, and we're getting that proper name property from the enum here. Okay, which is simply returning self.name, but that's okay. We want to be consistent in our code, so we always want to call the proper name property of our enum. Okay, so let's say at pronouns dot setter, and this is going to take a value, which in this case can be an optional list of pronouns. And here when we're doing the set, and this is not going to have a return, and here when we're doing the set, we can check if value is none, then we can say self.pronouns equals an empty list. Else, self.pronouns equals the value that we've passed in. And let's regardless call self.update. Okay, next up is our race. Oop, too many @ signs. Race, and this is going to return us an optional string. And I want to do the same kind of check here that we did up here for gender. Okay, so we could even copy this down here to race, and let's rename this variable race instead. And then make sure we change the enum we're comparing to a race enum. Awesome, doing good. Let's make race.setter. And the value for this will be an optional union of race and string with no return. And like before, we can say self.race, race equals the value, and call self.update. Let's say at property, too many @ signs again, goodness. And then we'll say the clan for this one. And again, we'll return an optional string here. And I want to do, whoopsies. I want to do the same logic that we did for our race. Okay. And then we can change each of these to clan. This one, this one, this one, and then compare to the clan enum. And honestly, let's just copy this, the setter for race, because the setter for clan is going to be the same, but just specifying clan. And then we have to name it clan as well. Okay, what's next? Next up is orientation. So property, orientation. This is going to return an optional string. And the same logic is going to apply since we're using an enum here. So let's just paste. Uh-oh, grabbed too many lines. And we'll dedent these. There we go. And so self._orientation is the variable that we're examining here. And we're comparing to an orientation enum. Okay, let's grab this, make our setter. And the value for this is an optional union of orientation and string with no return. Self.orientation equals the value and self.update call right there. Okay, next up is the height. So property, height. And for this, I want to return an optional string. Optional union of string or integer. So the reason we're doing this is because we may have stored a string value here, but within this getter, we're going to check and see if we stored an integer value, and if we did, we're going to convert it to that integer before returning it to the user. Okay, so first off, if self.height is none, let's return ns. elif self.height.isDigit. Okay, so we're checking the string value to see if it's the digit. Let's return integer of self.height. Otherwise, we're just going to return self.height like that. Okay, so a little bit of a different conversion, but ultimately the same kind of logic we've been doing in the previous properties. So let's say height.setter, def height, and we're going to take in our value, which is an optional union of string or int. And we'll just say self.height equals value and self.update. Okay, almost done. Two more. Let's make a bunch of these. Okay, so up next is our property for age, which will return us optional, and this is going to be a union, optional union of string or int, just like above, because we may have stored a custom value in here. Otherwise, we just want to return the age integer. So same logic applies. If self.age is none, let's return ns. elif self.age, self.age.isDigit. My brain's getting a little ahead of my mouth here. Let's return an integer converter of self.age. Otherwise, let's just return self.age, the string value. Cool. And let's make our setter for that. So at age.setter. And this will take a value, which is the same as before, an optional union of string or int with no return. I think you're seeing the trend here. Self.age equals value, self.update. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast, but I mean, we've covered most of these things. So, you know, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add some formatting here, because in the event that we return a string value for our age or height, something that our users and the profile viewers would expect to be an integer, I want to return that formatted. So let's wrap this in quotes and tick marks and an F string here, and then let's put this in brackets. Okay, so ultimately when we return this, we'll return any string value that is not a digit as a code snippet, just to set it apart. Okay, so we're going to do that here as well. Okay, and you'll see how this affects it once we preview it, once we test it, once we get the formatting all taken care of. But bear with me for now. Okay, so the last thing we need to make a property for is our mayor code, which will be an optional string, no combination this time. Oops. And if self.mayor is none, return ns. Otherwise, we can just return self.mayor. Okay, that one's easy. And at mayor.setter, value for this is an optional string only with no return. And we'll just say self.mayor. I think you know where we're going with this one too, equals the value and self.update. Okay, awesome. We are done with our properties. And now we can build our status message. Okay, so let's take a look at Discord and see what we like and what we don't like about the way that it's made before. Okay, so if I type in at a glance and select our command, you can see we have our at a glance section, and it looks the same way it does on the main profile, right? So if I delete this intermediary message, you can see that the at a glance here and the at a glance here are the same thing. And as much as I like that, as easy as that is to understand, I'd like to create a field for each of the at a glance items to separate them each out. Okay, just a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. So down here, let's go ahead and def status. And when you define our status, let's make sure we import embed and embed field at the top. I have this imported from earlier when I was doing some debugging, but you'll need to import both of those from the Discord namespace. So the behavior in our at a glance class, like I said, it's going to be very format heavy. So every time we display information to the user, we're going to need to format it somehow. Okay, and the status message is going to be no different. So before we actually get the values we want to input into the fields, I want to define the fields list itself so that you have an idea of what the layout's going to be and where the information that we define is going to go and what it's going to look like, or at least what the structure will look like. So for this, I'm going to define a bunch of embed fields. And just to make my life easier, I'm going to duplicate this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Well, I'll make 8 total copies. Okay, and then in here, we don't actually need to use name value and inline as keyword arguments. So I'm going to do away with that for the time being for space. And for each of the embed fields that we have a title on, I want to make sure we enclose that title in double underlines, okay, because that will underline the text in Discord. So the first thing is race and clan. And just for the time being, I want to define a dummy value, and I'm going to make it the string value of NS. Okay, we're gonna get rid of this in a minute, but so we don't have any squigglies, I just want to use that dummy value within each of the fields to get rid of the squigglies, like I said. Okay, and then this is going to be inline. The next field down is our gender/pronouns. And again, we're going to insert the dummy value here and make this inline. Now the third field, we're going to make the title blank. Okay, and for the value, I want to insert our draw separator function with an extra length of 30, not 300. Oh goodness. And then we'll make this not inline. And while we're at it, I'm just going to grab this line and I'm going to paste it down here as the 6th item as well. Okay, so we have a row of 2 columns, a separator, a row of 2 columns, a separator, and a row of 2 columns. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So the next section is our orientation with a dummy value and true for inline. And then here, I want to put our friend ID. And the reason I want to put a friend ID here is because the age and the height are generally numbers, and I feel like those should go next to each other. So that's just the way we're going to organize the status message. This is a dummy value for now and inline. And then down here, we're going to put height, dummy value, inline, and finally, you guessed it, age with a dummy value and true for inline. Okay, so this is how our fields are going to be set up. So we need to come up with values to put in each of these named fields instead of our dummy value. So let's do that. So down here under our dummy value, I'm going to say race val equals clan val equals string value of NS. And then in the event that self.race, the property, is not NS, we're going to say the race value, if self.race, race value equals self.race if self.race, because if we go back up here to race, we're always going to be getting a string out of it, okay? Unless it's NS. But we've handled that, so we know we're going to get the string value. So we can just directly assign that to race value if it exists. And let's say if self.clan is not NS, we're going to do the same behavior. So the clan value equals self.clan, the property. Cool. Okay, so let's also define the race clan, okay, because these are going to end up on the same line. And I just want to say f string, and then we're going to have race value and that slash clan value, okay? So it'll be the race value with a slash in between it and the clan value. Okay, now let's say that the user has input custom values for these. Okay, so let's check the underlying data points. So if is instance self._race is a string, or is instance self.clan is a string, what do we want to do? We want to say race_clan plus equals a new line and then some asterisks and parentheses, and in here we're going to put custom values. And let's put values in parentheses as well, just to indicate we could have one or both of these. Okay, cool. So that's what we want to do for our race and clan. Let's drop down and let's do the same thing for gender. Gender val equals pronoun val equals the string of NS. Okay, because we may be overwriting this, and again, let's just get rid of our dummy value here. It's going to create some squigglies, but we'll fix those here in a minute. Okay, so if self.gender is not NS, we want to set the gender val equal to self.gender. Likewise, if self.pronouns is not NS, we want to set the pronoun val equal to self.pronouns, okay? Because remember, in the self.pronouns property, we're already formatting that, okay? So that's awesome. That's the reason we're defining the formatting behavior within the getter of the property. Okay, so let's say down here, let's say GP combined for gender pronouns combined equals an F string, and it's going to be the gender value, and then a couple of hyphens, and then 2 asterisks, open close parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're going to put the pronoun value. Okay, that's the formatting that I want to use. But let's say that gender is a string. Let's say that the users put in a custom value for that. So we'll do the same check here. If is instance self._gender is a string, we're going to say GP combined plus equals a new line, asterisks, parentheses inside, and then we'll put custom value, just like that. Okay, so next up, let's continue this similar formatting with orientation. So I'm going to say orientation val equals string of NS to start, and then if self.orientation, the property, is not NS, we're going to say orientation value equals self.orientation, because that returns us their string. And then we can just say if is instance, we can just directly say this underneath because we're not processing a second value. So if is instance self._orientation string, we're going to add on to the orientation value plus equals a new line, 2 asterisks, open close parentheses, and custom value inside there. Okay, cool. All right, let's define our last 3 values here. So height val equals age val equals mayor val equals string of NS. Okay, and let's process them accordingly. So if self.height is not NS, well, let's pass for now because I want to write a function that formats the height for us, but I want to finish our logic here first. We're almost done. Okay, so let's also handle if self.age is not NS. Well, in this case, we don't need to format anything, so we can just say age val equals self.age, because within self.age, again, we're formatting the string the way that we want it depending upon what class the underlying data point is. Okay? And then if self.mayor is not NS, Let's set the mayor value equal to self.mayor. Okay, cool. So let's sub in our values down here in the fields. So for this, I want to say race clan for the first field value, GP combined for the second, orientation value, mayor value, height value, which we're going to set in a moment, and age value like that. Okay, now let's go by our height property, and right underneath the setter, I want to make a new function. Oop, new function. And actually, let's just make this a property, because it doesn't need to have any information passed into it. It's only acting on the information already present within the class. Okay, and we're going to call this formatted height. It'll take the self and return us a string of some kind. So the first thing we want to check is if self.height with an underscore is none, or is instance self.height with an underscore string, I want to return self.height the property. Okay, now why are we doing that? Because within this property, we're already formatting a string value and a none value here, right? So this is going to return the string value in either of these cases. Otherwise, we need to do some formatting, okay? And our formatting is going to look like this. So first thing we need to do is get the inches that our height is, right? Okay, so I want to make an integer conversion of self.height divided by 2.54, okay? Oh, and we have a squiggly, so let's go up to our init. And this was my fault. So height should be an optional union of string and integer, okay? Likewise, the same typing for age, union string integer, okay? And then we will deal with this underlying data point within the property. Okay, so back down to our formatted height, right there. And next I want to get the number of feet that this corresponds to, okay? So this will be int inches divided by 12. And then finally, we're going to say the leftover number of inches equals int inches modulo 12. Okay? So this will be the number of inches left over after our feet conversion. And finally, I just want to return a formatted string, and we're going to say feet with an apostrophe, space leftover with an escaped double quote, right? Because that's how we indicate inches. And then in parentheses over here, I want to put a tilde, and I want to say self.height centimeters. Okay, so self.height centimeters and end parenthesis. So basically, we're making this readable in both standard and metric because we want our bot to be as wide-ranging as possible and as accessible to as many people as possible. So that's how we're going to do this. So let's go back down here to our status message, and if self.height is not ns, I want to make the height value equal to self.formatted height, okay? Like that. And then we can finally go down underneath our fields and we can plug all this in to a returned make_embed function. Okay, so as usual, the color is going to be self.parent, self.parent.color. Let's say title equals an f string, and it'll be at a glance section details for self.parent.character name. Just like that. And let's put our description. So what do we want our description to be? Well, I want to actually put a little bit of information about what's going on here. So in quotes and inside asterisks, we're going to say all sections aside from race and clan. And let's make that bold, are optional. Okay, we'll add an asterisk and a new line. And here I want to say asterisk, open parenthesis, click, the corresponding button below to edit each data point. Period, end parenthesis, end asterisk, new line, and then I want to make an F string and pass in draw separator with an extra of 35 characters. Okay? So hopefully the formatting on that makes sense. Let's go ahead and define our fields, or excuse me, pass in our fields. And then for the timestamp, we can say false. Okay? And that's all we need for our status message. Cool, cool, cool. So what's next? Well, I think now that we have somewhere to store the data, let's go ahead and add our load and save logic from the database, and then we'll plug it into the profile, and then we can do some testing and make sure everything works. So we'll open up our database script, and then right here underneath our personality table, let's run another query. For this query, I want to say create table if not exists at a glance, all one word, open parenthesis. First line is our profile ID, which is text, unique, and not null every time. Next is our gender, and we're going to be storing all of our data points as text because we can easily convert text into a digit and then load that digit into our enum. So that's why we're doing it that way. Pronouns is equal to text. Race is text. Clan is text. I think you see how this is going to work. Orientation, height, age, and mayor. Just like that. And then we need to say constraint at a glance underscore p key, primary key, and we're going to put profile ID in parentheses and close both sets of parentheses. Cool. So let's add our at a glance information to the view that we're constructing. So I'm just going to say A for at a glance. Okay, and we'll say a.gender, a.pronouns, a.race, a.clan, a.orientation, thanks for sticking with me, folks, a.height, a.age, and a.mayor. Let's make sure we put a space after mayor. We don't want a comma on the very last one, or it'll mess up the from clause. Okay? So let's put a space after our second join clause, and we'll drop down and add a third one. So join at a glance A on p.profile ID equals a.profile ID. A.profile ID. Like that. And let's not forget, like we did last time, to create a new record into the at a glance table when a profile is created. So here I want to say at a glance, like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug this into our profile class. Right, so the first thing we need to do is actually go back into at a glance, and this was a mistake on my part. Let's go up to the top and define dunderall. So we'll say dunderall equals profile at a glance with a comma to make it a tuple. Okay, and make sure we have an equals sign as well. Okay, so let's make sure we've exported that in our init file. Yes, we're good there. And let's go into our profile, and we will add at a glance to the constructor, which is a profile at a glance. And up here from classes.profiles, we can, at this point, we can just import star. Okay, and then down here we're going to say self.atAglance, which is a profile at a glance, equals the at a glance that we passed in. Okay, let's say we're creating a new profile. So we want to say self.atAglance equals profile at a glance, and it will pass in the self like that. Just the same behavior as we've had for the other sections. Our load logic is going to be a little bit different though. Well, not really. Self.atAglance equals profile at-a-glance.load. And we haven't defined our load and update yet. But that's okay because we know what behavior is going to be contained within that method because it's the same behavior we've had in the other two classes so far. Okay, so for this we want to pass in the self and a slice of data. Okay, but how do we know what indices we need to pass in? Excuse me. Well, let's go to our database script again and let's look at this view that we've created because we can just get the information from here. So remember, data points 0, 1, and 2 are actually, let's make some comments. So data indices 0 through 2 are internal. Here we can say data indices 3 through, what did we say? 3 through 8 are our 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are our details. Data indices 9, 10, 11, and 12, 9 through 12 are personality. Thank goodness for comments, right? And let's say data indices 13 through, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So through 20 are at a glance. Okay? So let's refer to this. So our data indices for personality are 9 through 12. So let's make this 9 through 13 because it's exclusive. And then we'll be lazy and we'll say 13 through the end for now. Okay. So in theory, all of this should be loading correctly. Let's go ahead and start it up and begin the debugging process. Come on. And success? No success. Okay. Well, it seems I've misspelled the word race. So let's go here to our view and we'll fix that. Let's rerun. Hey, that's good news. Everything is working at least initially when the bot starts up. So let's pull up our database manager and I'm going to refresh my tables. And as you can see, now we have an at-a-glance table with all the columns we defined. And if we look at the SQL for the table, that looks really familiar, doesn't it? Okay, cool. So that's good. Let's also take a look at our view. And as you can see down here, we've got gender through mare in our view now. Awesome. Okay, so this is working great. Let's go ahead and stop our bot for the time being. And I'm going to open up our profiles cog so that we can make a new command that accesses the status of our at-a-glance. Okay, so at profiles.command, we're going to name this at-a-glance, all one word. And keep in mind, the / command names need to be lowercase. Okay, that's a requirement or we will get an error if there's any uppercase characters in those, just for future reference. Let's make the description edit or delete your gender, pronouns, race, clan, and other demographic info. Okay, that's pretty basic. That's all they need to know. Let's define the function. So it'll be async def profile at a glance, profile at a glance, and we'll automatically take in the CTX, which is an application context, and it won't return us anything. Let's go ahead and grab this logic from up here in personality because it's the exact same thing we're going to do, except here instead of personality, let's say at a glance. Okay, we haven't defined our set function yet within the at a glance though. Okay, so let's do that really fast. Oops. So let's jump over here to at a glance and we'll go down to the bottom. And right under our status, let's override async def set. Okay, like that, and it takes the interaction and returns none. And for the time being, since we don't have a view set up, we don't have any buttons defined, we're going to do that in the next video. But for now, I just want to say await interaction.response.send message, and I'm going to set the embed equal to self.status. Status. Okay, and that's just going to let us preview and make sure that the embed is working correctly. So let's give it a shot. Everything should still be booting correctly. I'm hoping. Okay, that's what I like to see. Let's jump into Discord, and we will run our @glance command. Okay, hey, this is awesome. This is looking really good, actually. So as you can see, we've got even columns to display our 6 data points, and we've got some instructions here with a separator. Now, the separator isn't quite long enough, but that's okay. We can fix that in a minute. I just want to be happy that this is working with very little debugging. Y'all should pat yourselves on the back because we are doing great. So we can jump back into our code, and in @glance, in the status message function, let's change this to 38 for the length of our draw separator. Okay, we can tweak it more later, but for the time being, let's change it to 38 so we remember. Okay. Now let's define our update and load logic. Okay, since we're at the bottom, we can define update first. So def update, and it's going to be the same initial logic as before. So c equals dbconnection.cursor, and then we want to say c.execute. And down here, we're going to put our query. And this query is going to be a little bit bigger than the other ones, but it's ultimately going to be the same format. So update @glance. And we're going to set gender equal to %s, race equal to %s. Let's put pronouns in there so we don't forget. Pronouns equal to %s, race equal to %s, clan equal to %s, orientation equal to %s, height, age, mayor equal %s, where profile ID equals %s. Okay? Add a column, drop down, and what do we want to put for our values? So remember, we stored our values as text data points, right? Every single one of these is a text item. So we're going to need to convert some of our underlying data points into text in order to store it. So let's do each of them in turn. So we're going to do it up here before the query and before we open our cursor. And we'll keep with the same naming convention that I've used in other functions. So we'll say gender val equals, and I want to do an open parenthesis because we're going to make a multi-line if-else statement. Okay? So self.gender, the underlying data point, if is instance self.gender is a string, or self.gender is none. Okay? So in the event that we have a string in the underlying data point, so that means that they've set a custom value, we're going to set the gender value to that string. Because remember, our gender field within the database is text. But in the event that self.gender is none, in the event they haven't set it, we also want the gender value to be none in this case. Okay, so it'll put a blank value in the database. But what if we have a gender enum? Okay, let's say else string of self.gender, we have some squigglies, we'll figure that out in a second, dot value. Okay, so we need to grab the integer value of our gender enum, and then we convert that to a string so we can store it in the database. Okay? And here's our problem. If, not is. So self.gender, if is instance self.gender string, or self.gender is none. Else we're going to return the string value of the enum's value. Okay, does that make sense? Perfect. Let's copy this. And we'll say race val, self.race. And we're just going to copy race into each of these spots. Copy this again for clan, Self.clan is the data point we're looking at here. Orientation val. Actually, why am I not copying this? Excuse me. Orientation val. Self.orientation. And let's do height, because it may potentially be an integer. Okay, so we want to plan for that. Self.height here. here, here, and here. But remember, our self.height doesn't actually have a value if it's not a string or none. It's an integer. So we just want the string value of the integer itself, okay? And then we'll copy one last time for the age val. Self.age is the data point we're looking at. And it's going to have the same behavior here, just a string value of self.age if it doesn't match this initial condition. Okay, so we don't need to take age.value. Okay, so let's plug in each of our data points here. Oh, and we forgot pronouns. I apologize. So pronoun value equals, and this is just going to be list comprehension because regardless, remember, we have an empty list no matter what. So we can just say p.value for p in self.pronouns. So we're grabbing the value from each enum item in our self.pronouns list. And then when we store this list, it will automatically be converted to text. Each item within the list will be text. So we don't have to convert it there. Okay, so for these, let's go in order. So we have our gender value. We have our pronoun value. We have our race, clan, orientation, clan, val, orientation, height val. Oop, let's name this height val. Okay, so height value here, age value, and mare value, mare. Oh, we can just say self.mare for this because it's either none or it's a string. So we can literally just pass that directly in. Easy. And then we can just say self.parent.id for the profile ID. Okay? And one more thing, I know I've been forgetting a couple of things. For our pronoun value here, we need to add the condition if self.pronouns, else none. So if self.pronouns is a blank list, we're going to store none in the database. Okay? It really doesn't matter either way, but I prefer a blank value if there's an absence of data. Okay, so let's say down here db connection.commit, and we'll close our cursor for good behavior. Okay, this is our update function. Cool, pretty straightforward. Let's jump up here under our constructor, and we'll make our load function. So this is a class method, and we'll say def load. And our data is going to be a list of strings, okay? Because each of these is somehow going to be represented by a string value. So under our dunder all, let's define a type variable. So I'm going to say AAG equals typeVar. First parameter is AAG, and the second one is bound profile at a glance. Let's go ahead and import type and typeVar from typing up here. And let's substitute our shortened type name in here. So AAG, and it will also return AAG. So the behavior in our load class method is more or less going to be the counter behavior to what we did in update. So in update, we watered down our data points to text values, or none in the event that they don't exist. So here, we want to reconstruct our data points from the text values we watered them down to. Okay, so gender val equals, open parentheses, because this will be a multi-line block, and I want to say gender enum, gender, int data sub 0, if data sub 0, is not none, let's drop down, and data sub 0 dot is digit, and int data sub 0, int data lowercase sub 0 is less than or equal to 4. Okay, now why are we saying 4 here? Because that's the length of our gender enum, right? In fact, we could just simply say gender dot, or excuse me, len of gender. Okay, and that's going to give us the number of items within the gender enum, which in this case is 4. So why are we making this? Why are we doing this check? Well, in the extremely edge case chance that the user puts a single number into the custom value for gender, we don't want this to try and convert that into a gender, because if it's not 1 through 4, we're going to get an error. Okay, so we want to just say if it's 1 through 4, then convert to a gender enum, otherwise just make it a text value. Okay? And in the event that none of this works, we're just going to say else none. Okay? So if data sub 0 ends up being none, we'll just store none in the gender value. Okay, so pronoun value. What are we going to do for this? Well, let's say equals a multi-line item, and I want to do some list comprehension. So pronoun int I for I in convert database list, because we have to convert that list into data that we can use, data sub 1. And let's drop down. If data sub 1 is not none, else an empty list. Okay? So one way or another, we're getting an empty list into this value, just like we did in our details class with the jobs. Okay, so let's say race. And this is going to be similar to our gender value. So let's do this, and we'll reformat race. And the data point is going to be data sub 2 for this one, okay? And make sure we change the enum we're comparing to race. Great. Let's do the same thing with clan. You can see that the formatting and the behavior that we're putting in is more or less the same in each of these, but we need to define them separately instead of maybe a one-stop shop function, just because there's enough that's different about each data point that we're loading that it's just best to make separate line items for them instead of like a single function, one-stop shop kind of situation. Don't mind me rambling while I build all of this. It has to be pretty boring to watch, so trying to make it a little bit more interesting, have a conversation with you, hope your day is going great, you know, that kind of thing. For orientation, let's change the enum we're comparing to orientation, and then this will be data sub 4 that we're using. And then let's go ahead and do height. Let's say multi-line int data sub 5 if data sub 5 is not none, and data sub 5 dot is digit, else none. Okay, so we're doing the same check here, except we don't have an enum that we're comparing to, so we're just literally checking to see if it's a digit and returning that instead. Okay, and the age value is going to be extremely similar. So age val, and this is going to be data point sub 6, and the behavior is the same. Okay, cool. And then remember, since we're storing our mayor code as an optional string in the database, we can just pass that back directly. So let's return our class. And in here, let's say the parent is equal to the parent. Gender is equal to gender val. Pronouns equal pronoun val. Race equals race val. Clan. I don't think you need me to tell you each of these. Orientation val. Oh my goodness. Comma. Getting a little ahead of myself here. Imagine that. Mayor equals, and then mayor is the different one, like I said. So this is just going to be directly data sub 7. Okay, and this is our load logic right here. So now let's see if everything's working. Let's see if our bot is loading properly with this new load logic, because remember, we've instantiated a profile before. So if we look in our database and we view all the data in our view, doing our test in Discord earlier instantiated this profile. We don't have any data in here right now, but there is a record. Okay, so let's see if we can load that record properly. And I would say that's a success. Okay, cool. So even though there's no data in the profile right now, that means that it did populate properly. And if we go into Discord and run our at-a-glance command, we get the same status message. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here for now. We've got our at-a-glance class set up, and then in the next video, I want to deal with all of the UI elements and our buttons and our modals and getting everything compiled. It's going to be great. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.